and licensed as an architect and structural engineer. Her expertise is in high performance building systems, seismic design and retrofitting, net zero energy residential construction, prefabrication, and collaborative practice. She's also founding director of the Carbon Leadership Forum, which you're going to hear a lot about here in a minute, an industry academic collaborative research effort focused on linking LCA to design and construction practice to advance low carbon construction. Kate, take it away.
Okay, well, thank you all. Thank you very much for coming. For some reason, my camera isn't working, so I don't get to look you all in the eye, but I'm really happy to be here. Next. So as mentioned, the Carbon Leadership Forum is at the University of Washington, and we're keenly focusing on both understanding embodied carbon, but figuring out strategies to radically reduce and ultimately eliminate it. So we pioneer research and create resources, foster cross-sector collaboration, and incubate member-led initiatives all around this goal. Next. We can just go quickly on here. This is just a representing of the diversity of sponsors, from owners to contractors to material manufacturers, that enable us to do this work. So thank you to them. Next. So as I think it seems like everybody on this call is aware, we're talking about a total building sector decarbonization. And in order to do so, we need to address both the operating carbon and the embodied carbon. And that does come to a whole life cycle approach. Although we have strategies about how we can eliminate operating carbon. Embodied carbon really is a new frontier. We have ideas about how we can get there, but we're still learning. But simultaneously, embodied carbon, it really means industrial decarbonization. So how do we drive carbon out of manufacturing processes that often use significant amounts of heat, that have chemical reactions that take place in their manufacturing? So it's not so simple as just electrifying factories. There is more to do there, and it requires substantial investment. So while it may be hard, it's also urgent to act, because the investments of industrial decarbonization take time. And so it's really important and exciting that you're integrating embodied carbon into your decarbonization roadmap. Next. So as has been mentioned, the building materials and construction can be as much as or more than 11% of the impacts if we look at primary manufacturing of steel and cement and aluminum. But if we look at the built environment as a whole, there's more that goes into that, from furniture and fittings to finishes. And so, we're estimating that it could be as much as 20% or more of the total greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing can be attributed to building materials and usage. Next. And when you look at setting global greenhouse or regional or local greenhouse gas emissions targets, I'm showing a slide here from the California Energy Commission, and the content on the left is talking about how California has been successful at growing population and GDP while simultaneously reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And those emissions that are tracked are the emissions that take place in the state itself. And this does bring to the challenge of a carbon loophole, or the emissions from the purchased goods that are manufactured outside of state. So if you focus solely on the emissions that take place in state, but don't address the embodied emissions from consumer goods and building manufacturing products, you could effectively outsource all of your manufacturing, meet your statewide goals, but not meet the climate goals that we need to reduce these emissions. Doesn't matter where they take place. Next. So if we look at understanding and reducing embodied carbon, the basic math of taking how many materials you use and multiplying it by the impacts of those materials get you your total result. And if you're looking at strategies then of reducing embodied carbon, you have to look at the interplay between material efficiency and the use of materials. So that's the reusing of buildings. Next, you can go to the next slide. If we're looking at strategies, the first main strategy, and probably the most important first one, is about optimizing the project. So as mentioned by others, retrofitting existing buildings, building smaller buildings, don't build a building when you don't need it. And in many of those, that work can be supported by rules of thumb. If you build half as much building, you're building approximately half as much embodied carbon. So you can start to set strategies around that project optimization today. System-based optimization, that would be where you start looking at an alternative system, like people were talking about a cross-laminated timber instead of some other structural system, or a new different wall assembly types. And there it's really important that you take life cycle thinking into account, and so that you're really making sure you're making the trade-offs between operating and embodied, as well as end of life and a total circular approach to changing things. The third one is around optimizing procurement. So that strategy is, I know I'm buying a specific type of material and I want to drive towards the lower carbon option of that material. So that's where you're seeing things like the environmental product declarations, buy clean policy, and the EC3 tool, which I think will be talked about later. And this then brings up the first point here is that transparency value that really links to environmental product declarations. So I want to quickly just set the stage here next with what I see are some key policy levers. Next slide. So first off, the best thing that you can do is something, and by including embodied carbon in your decarbonization strategy. That's a critical first step. Know that set the long-term goal of where you want to be by 2050 or 2040, and start acting today. You can do that at a scale of procurement, and what do you purchase, the codes and standards that you set, supporting research and development. So I could go into those in more detail or break back to the main group, whatever the project team wants me to do.
Kate, I would say you have about another minute. So if you
next.
Do it however you want to move.
Okay, I'll do a minute next. Okay, just procurement. No, not net. Back one. One of the exciting things about procurement policy is that it really can start with transparency. So that you're requiring EPDs, supporting the development of EPDs. And I firmly believe that you can start by setting targets that are achievable today, understanding the market. You still can cut out 30 players and still have a really strong competition, but optimize that performance over time. And there's developing tools and data to help do that. Next. Embodied carbon codes and standards. There are examples of coming into building codes and planning codes, as well as rating systems and things such as demolition ordinances. So these are key ways to get things to scale. It just becomes business as usual. Again, you can start at an achievable and set targets that go over time. And next, onto the research and development, was mentioned by some of the other people. There's a lot of really exciting opportunities for new carbon storing materials, taking agricultural waste, turning it into building products, developing a material recovery and reuse supply chain, and incentivizing sustainable timber. All of those things can be integrated into investments in regional manufacturing, as well as supporting local business is in the creation of the LCA and EPD. So on the sort of development side, there's education and business support that could be happening. And on the research side, there are really needs for significant investment in low carbon metals and cements and bio-based material substitutes, sort of farther term that could come out. I tend to think of that more at a federal level, but I do think states could identify key industries and invest in those. And then, as mentioned before, there needs additional support for data and infrastructure. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, Kate,
you can stop.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate, for sharing the work of the Carbon Leadership Forum. Lots of great stuff in here that you're tying it, embodied and operational carbon off to